Greetings, everybody. I'm obviously Jesus, and before you say "What the fuck are you doing?" Yes, the towel is happening as usual. I've taken a shower right before recording my Patreon video, but I'm tired of my hair looking really bad and greasy on my videos, so we are doing it in the entirely not racist at all the towel. I mean, no, in all seriousness, my hair literally is quite wet, and I don't like how it looks. And people do this all the time. So anyway, welcome to the third Patreon video for the month of whatchamacallit. This is October 2018. If you're wondering why I'm looking over here, it's because that's where my notes for this commentary are. Because I put my third monitor on my little table over here that you can't see. And it was only a matter of time before I pushed it over by accident, with my big ass feet getting up from the chair, and so it is broken, and I'll have to wait the next month to get one. But yeah, that's a thing that's happening. So I'm gonna be looking like about here in order to read off my script. So sorry if you're not getting a full frontal OJ face. Not that that's really integral to the content of the video. But today's video is gonna be talking about whether or not photography is art, and in a more general sense, my own experience with photography as something that I do fairly often. So anyway, we're gonna go through my history with photography as a medium, and then we will move on to cover the more philosophical question of whether or not photography is art, because there's been, sort of a very sort of low burning, simmering debate over whether or not photography is truly an art form for a particularly long time. And we're going to talk about, and not to really spoil anything, but we're going to talk about the nature of art in general as well. So we'll move on from my own personal history to, the philosophical idea of photography and things that aren't directly creative, whether or not they are really art. And then at the very end, we'll circle back to a more technical explanation for those of you who are interested maybe in the medium of photography but aren't particularly sure how it all works. We'll circle back to some examples of photos I've taken and go over what's going on in them, just as for a preview of an idea that I'm shopping that we will see about as we go on in this video. But anyway, I am wearing the towel. Let us proceed. So basically, to open up here, over the past few years, I really have taken to photography as an outlet for again, it's a question of whether or not it's a truly creative pursuit, but for my I guess creative pursuits is the word I would use, regardless of any type of debate there. Photography is something that I took to initially because, back in the old YouTube days, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I came to photography when I got my first DSLR camera, a Canon T3i, which of course I got for making my first few vlogs. I remember I made my first vlog in a stupid fucking hat I got at Faneuil Hall in or Quincy Market in Boston, and I was sitting in the chair and I wasn't even in focus. But yeah, it was pretty terrible. But yeah, that's how I came to photography, because I initially was producing videos for the YouTube channel. So when I pivoted to video, I wound up with a DSLR, which is of course the type of thing that you also use for photography. And back then, of course, I had no clue about the different lenses and different lens types. I could barely really even figure out how to balance the ISO and shutter speed and aperture to produce decent results. And honestly, I'm surprised that the old videos I used to make on my whiteboard, like Java with Jesus, even came out in focus half the time, considering how uninformed I was at the time as well. And, of course, back then, video production was my primary focus for a very long time. But on trips to New Hampshire with my friends that I would take, or elsewhere, if I was going anywhere where I would be seeing any kind of new sites, I would bring my camera and take pictures, even if I was, planning to make videos there as well. And eventually I learned a little bit more about all the different settings. And, one thing led to another. And as with most things that I talk about on this channel, it all circles around my ex that I'm still very much in love with. And, my interest in photography sort of took a step up and solidified itself in a way when I was told by her, and, she went to art school, so she would know that I had a really good eye for framing in my photography. So that, put the little seed in my head that would really grow to become a full-fledged interest in photography years later. I didn't really know what to take pictures of, though, when I was just in that sort of nascent phase where I only had I really only knew what the hell I was doing with regards to video, and even then I wasn't particularly experienced. I really didn't know what people would really take pictures of. I felt like any landscapes I tried back then came out kind of shitty looking because I really only had a kit lens that came with the camera for a while. And, while I do occasionally enjoy taking pictures of architecture and buildings and stuff, and I did plenty of that in Europe last year, as we'll look at the end of the video in some of those samples. There's really only so much you can do with a still object, like whether it's something tiny or something large like a building. And since flash is ineffective outdoors, at least during the day, there's really not a whole ton you can do with architectural photography if the light isn't really working with you, or you're not in a place at the right time of day. Like, it's nice to shoot stuff during the golden hour, of course, but it doesn't even really last an hour. So you run the risk of either failing on one of those counts, or you wind up repeating the same sort of cliche photos others have taken when you go to do architectural stuff or buildings or landscapes or what have you. Or at worst, if you're in another country, you can wind up just feeling totally touristy and unoriginal and derivative. As for other photographic pursuits, I've really never tried taking photos as like the end point or the product of some artistic pursuit, like an art piece that you set up for the express purpose of taking pictures of it and having that be the final product. I can't really speak to that, and I also can't really speak to macro photography because I don't have the right type of lens for it. But I do think macro photography might be a little bit interesting to me. But again, you can really only macro photography. All you really do is, as far as I know, you just aim your macro lens at something and take a picture of it. It's not really that interactive, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. There's also a different type of photography called I'm probably going to say philosophy instead of photography a lot in this video, so assume that's what I'm doing if I drop that out somehow by accident. But yeah. There's street photography, but personally that's sort of like in an ethical gray area, because yes, people are in public, but even if you're not monetizing anything you're doing, you really shouldn't enrich yourself off of just taking pictures of people going about their day, especially if they're like identifiable in that. So I feel like street photography is kind of a weird ethical gray area. I don't really look down on people who do it, but it would be something that I would be uncomfortable being confronted about doing myself. So I really don't take an interest in that type of thing. Yeah, I wouldn't, because I wouldn't want someone capturing my image in great detail without paying me when I was literally just going about my day doing nothing special. Although when I was in Europe, I did quite enjoy taking pictures of weird shit that you see on a street that isn't really people related. So that is something I do enjoy. But all my photographic efforts really have been focused around the concert stuff, the live music photography. Because in about 2016, it was during PAX. I remember I had a PAX and 2 concerts on the same weekend, which was really fucking exhausting and rough. And even though I stayed in a hotel up in Boston for that year, it was really insane. I was worked to the bone just walking around, and my feet were so bad. But anyway, in 2016, around that time of PAX, I went to a concert, and there I met. Because I had my camera for PAX, and there I met another more experienced photographer, and he gave me some suggestions about how to set up or how to step up my game, rather. I was, at the time, using my Canon T3i still, but I used my savings after that to buy a Canon 6D and then the Tamron 24-70mm lens, the zoom, and also a cheap f1.8 50mm prime lens for my Canon cameras, which allowed me to do a wider variety of shots. And this is really what that's sort of like a beginner setup, I would say. Unfortunately, the Tamron is a company that makes like third-party lenses for both Canon and Nikon. So they're sort of like a more budget option that you can take to save a little bit of money but still get decent photo quality. Unfortunately, my particular 24-70mm lens isn't that great of a lens. I'm not sure if it's like just the build quality in general, or if I have some kind of shitty defect in mine, but a lot of the photos don't come out in focus a lot of the time. But that lens was good enough in decent lighting, at least, to teach me how to do wider shots and also get me experience using a proper zoom lens that didn't come with the camera. I definitely highly recommend a 24-70 lens if you're starting out in photography for pretty much anything except landscapes, which would require probably something different. But if you're starting out in photography, a 24-70 millimeter, especially for concert photography, is absolutely where you should start, because you can go wide enough at 24 to get a whole band in the shot if you're back far enough, and then you can also do some nice close-ups, especially when you're close to the stage when you're at 70 millimeters. But yeah, I would definitely recommend not buying the Tamron based on my experience for that lens. Their 70-200 is actually really good for Canon as well, and I use that to this day. But I basically, at the time I just started using this 24-70 very versatile lens and getting more familiar with it. I definitely also, if you are interested in this, I recommend buying, like I said, a cheap, like $100 50 millimeter prime lens, and learn, using the prime lens to physically move yourself around the subject, instead of rather, just not relying totally on the zoom. And if you are curious about what I have currently, I've upgraded to a Canon 5D Mark III, still a fantastic camera to this day that I would recommend to anybody, although at this point you might want to go mirrorless, because that's the trend, and I want to hop on Sony, and I think Nikon has one coming out. But now I have a wider angle lens for really wide, almost fisheye shots, like 16-35 millimeters, and then I have that 70-200 zoom I mentioned from Tamron as well, and also an 85 millimeter prime lens that does really nice portraits as well, although the 70-200 really takes care of that. So I'm thinking about selling that lens because I need some money, especially because that fucking monitor just broke. But anyway, yeah, that's my kit for now if you are a photography nerd and are interested in that. But yeah, that's where I got my start, and that's how my kit has grown over the years. And from that show, it was a show for operators. Dan Beckner from Wolf Parade, it's his sort of side project, his continuation rather, of the type of music he was kind of making in Handsome Furs, which of course is now a defunct band, but they play a lot of the Furs songs actually as covers. But yeah, from that operator show in 2016 up until now, and still kicking, I've been doing predominantly just that concert photography thing. I was always taking pictures on my phone at shows, not holding it above my head like a fucking asshole, but I would always get there early and get in front row, so that if I wanted to take a picture of an artist, or if I wanted to record a particular song that I like to watch back later when I had a fucking phone that was actually good enough to do that, I would have my camera in front of me, because again, front row, you don't have to lift it above your head like a cunt. But yeah, I was always taking pictures and videos of that stuff, and concerts being my only real leisure activity, or leisure as people sometimes say, in America versus in England, but concerts being my only real leisure activity that would take me outside of my house, and with my ex having told me that I was good at it, and I basically just used it as a way to elevate this thing that, went right hand in hand with my love for live music. But up until then, I really never knew how to utilize the camera and equipment like that for the purposes of anything except for making YouTube vids. So, that's when I started. In 2016 at that show, I just sort of decided, yeah, this is something that I want to do. This is something I want to commit my savings account to. This is something that, this is like the only interesting thing that I have encountered in my life. The only thing that even remotely, creates that little spark in your brain that says, yeah, you're interested in this. So that was the sort of the flashpoint there that grew that seed that my ex planted in my head in 2013 into that next stage. And I figured, like I said, I was always taking photos on my phone at shows. I figured I might as well do it for real in a more respectable way that would have a lot more value for me and for the band as well, if I were to send them the pictures as well. And so that's what I did. I got my start in smaller clubs in the Northeast, where they let you do photos without having to fuck around with press passes or anything. And I used that to build a bigger portfolio to show people who can give you press passes for bigger shows at different venues that you're serious. And I've been lucky to cover, even bigger artists like Modest Mouse that I did recently, just at the beginning of this month. I was able to cover Modest Mouse, and I can hopefully show you a couple photos from that later in the recap, if I remember. But yeah, concert photography appeals to me as well because, I was talking about the architectural photography and shit like that, but, it's way more interactive than anything like that. You have to really be paying attention. You have to watch your camera settings for the changing lighting conditions, and simultaneously you have to be watching the band for, good moments, like really, really emotive expressions, or like jump shots if you want to, get a band member who's jumping with his guitar or whatever. But, there is a sort of a flip side to that I've discovered fairly recently, though, that, once you have the good gear and once you get some nice shots, sometimes you do feel, especially at more tame shows where people aren't really moving around all that much and they basically look the same from song to song, especially, if you only get to shoot the first 3 songs, which is pretty much industry standard for medium to large size venues. There is a wall you kind of hit creatively, sort of, where you feel like for each band, you're sort of taking the same sorts of pictures. You'll do a couple portraits with the zoom or the prime, and you'll do a couple wider shots with the band, and you'll hope something exciting happens in the first 3 songs. But for some bands, they're pretty stable on stage. They don't move around a lot. They don't do a lot of, antics or anything like that. And that's why I like to cover a lot of punk and post-punk shows, because, they're always pretty lively. But, for bigger bands that have been doing it for a while, or they're like indie, quieter folk stuff, great music, but sometimes they're just a bit stoic as regards photography. And once you hit that kind of creative wall, you feel like you're trapped in this thing where you're doing the exact same thing every gig for one of these bands that doesn't move around a lot. And the photos come out great, like they're in focus, they're good, the framing's nice, you can edit them in Lightroom or whatever. They come out great and they please the bands individually, but for you, you're like maybe risking doing the same thing over and over again. So that's a wall you gotta watch out for hitting with concert photography, and really all you can do is just shoot more exciting bands and not worry so much about the other ones. And really the problem with that creative wall, though, is that there's really not a whole ton of places to go from that except to curate what you're shooting more towards what you like and more active bands, unless you want to be one of those cocksuckers holding up fucking crystals in front of you or in front of your lens in the photo pit trying to get kaleidoscope effects, as if that's not cliche already. You've seen one picture like that, you've really seen them all, essentially. And the same goes for like long exposures, which are sometimes appealing in especially like tiny, dingy, low light venues. You can do a long exposure and like maybe make it look like a double exposure, or you can start doing actual double exposures where you take 2 pictures from the same area and then superimpose them onto each other and level the opacity in Photoshop and something like that. You can do that, but as far as just taking a straight up good photo out of the camera and then doing some minor editing on it in Photoshop or Lightroom to get the lighting right, you can kind of hit a wall there. And there's always been this battle in me. Wow, look at that. That's why the towel's on, ladies and gentlemen. There's always been this battle in me because, when I was younger and I started going to, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. But yeah, when I was, much younger, and I would go to concerts and I would really only focus on being in the front row. You can't be in the front row at a show, especially when you have to be in the photo pit, shoot the first 3 songs, and then come back out, and you can't be in the front row then. So there's always been this sort of battle, and, hitting that wall has sort of made it even more murky for me, whether or not I want to shoot a show, because, are they going to be exciting enough, essentially, is the calculus I have to do. Are they going to be exciting enough? Am I going to get good enough photos that, I want to miss out on just being right there in the mosh pit, for the action or whatever. And so that's the thing you have to work out, but it's still, it's first world problems, really. You can still get some good photos once you get enough practice. But as we get to the closer here of this first part of the video, which honestly will probably be longer than the philosophical talk, I'm sorry, but as we get to the closer here, for those of you who are interested, 3 final pieces of advice I would give to any photographer, particularly a concert photographer, though, or somebody who wants to do that. Number 1, always shoot RAW. I don't know what it's called on Nikon or Sony cameras, but Canon has CR2 files, Canon RAW, and RAW files encode a lot more more information, so you have to get larger SD cards and CF cards and whatnot, and you want some redundancy in case one fails, but always shoot RAW, because you take it into Lightroom and you can manipulate a RAW photo so much better than you can just a regular fucking JPEG or whatever your camera shoots in that isn't the largest file. And that plays right into tip number two, never avoid Lightroom. Like, for years and years, like for the first year and a half at least that I was shooting shows, I never wanted to edit. I never wanted to do anything besides like go into OrphanView or XNView or whatever and toggle something to black and white to make it monochrome. I never wanted to do anything beyond that. I had this sort of purist philosophy about it, and boy, was that fucking stupid. I think back on all the videos that I thought were trash that I probably could have saved in Lightroom because I shot the RAW files that had all the information encoded into them so that I could manipulate them. And I get so sad because I probably deleted a bunch of great photos, dozens, if not hundreds of great photos I probably deleted that I could have saved with some light manipulation in Lightroom. And I just had this needlessly puristic attitude about it. So don't be afraid of the editing program. You don't have to go crazy about it. You don't have to turn everything monochrome or desaturate and saturate shit. But you can do slight edits. You can sponge up like some crazy highlights. Lightroom is your friend. It sucks that you can't own the software and you have to buy a fucking subscription, which ultimately will give them more money than you would have given if you could have just bought the software. But it's worth it if you are a photographer and you're serious. I pay $11 a month. I think it's 11 or 17, but I pay some pretty, no, it's 11. I pay 11, or is it 17? I can't fucking remember. I pay a pretty low price, about the price of Netflix, so to speak, for Photoshop and Lightroom, and I'm going to do that in perpetuity. I get all the new versions and shit, so that's a really good investment if you are serious about concert photography, especially for concert photography, because a lot of times, if you're especially when you're starting out, the way to make good photos is to shoot at a higher ISO, which will make your shit grainy and stuff, but you will be able to manipulate stuff and make it look a little bit better and compensate for that fucking bad lighting. You can turn stuff monochrome, you can do all sorts of things. Lightroom is your friend. I'm going to stop talking about it now. And the third piece of advice, though, is get a website, not a Flickr, not a 500 pixel, not any kind of image hosting site. Get a website with your own custom domain name. Think of some fucking random name. Do that. And then you will seem a lot more legit to people when you're asking them for press passes, because even a blog that has its own name and isn't just some page on some massive big name site is so much better as far as optics go to press people than just having a Flickr or whatever. So do that. Pay the $12 a month or $12 a year for a Google domain or a Squarespace or something like that, or a GoDaddy if you're good at web design. Do that if you want to get photo passes and shit. But the question then comes, that is the title of this video, even though it's disproportionate. Is all of this art? Is all of this photography stuff art? And really, for me, this isn't a question that really bothers me that much. It's sort of like a mental thought exercise plaything rather than anything that really has to do with my identity. I have no real concern about people perceiving me as an artist or a creative. P.S. If you use creative as a noun, you're a fucking asshole. Though I do suppose that me not caring about it doesn't mean that I really perceive myself that way. But, if you ask me, photography is more of a skill than a creative art, because while technically you are creating a product, either digital files or physical Polaroids or film, whatever it happens to be, you are there's definitely a philosophical difference in the sense that you are capturing something rather than creating something out of your head and having total creative control in the same way that you do when you're painting or you're making music or you're drawing of any kind, anything like that. That's coming straight out of your head when it comes to all those things I just mentioned, whereas photography, you're capturing stuff that already exists in the world. But that said, and there's a big ass caveat here. The skill of photography, or skills, if you want to break it down into, the different types of skills of photography, be it, framing, your settings, editing can even be thrown in there. The skill or skills of photography are very closely related to being able to see something artful that exists in the world. You have to have the sight and the kind of perception to know what looks good as photography goes. Even though photographers, especially for concerts, they take a lot of photos in sequence, you still have to know like when a particular moment is good, when the person is making a truly emotive face. You have to know certain things about the framing and the composition of your photo. You have to imagine how it's going to turn out and have the ability to imagine what the most artful interpretation of what it's existing in front of you is and capture it in photography. You have to have the ability to see something artful that exists in the world, or something that has the potential to be made artful or more artful by your act of capturing it through, again, your framing, your lighting, your long exposures, your depth of field, and just plain old knowing when to shoot, your timing. But all that said, none of this really implies a hierarchy where one thing is more skilled and one thing is less skilled, or one thing is more artful and one thing is less artful. Look at painting, for example. Painting can be extremely abstract and can require a lot more passion and emotion and feeling than skill. Look at fucking look at Rothko, that black and red painting that he did. It doesn't look like it took a particular degree of skill to paint that, versus something like the Mona Lisa or something. Like, he didn't have to tune any dials. He sort of just had to paint what he was feeling, I guess. But while there are types of things like painting that can sometimes be recognized clearly as art while requiring a particularly low degree of actual technical skill, photography, on the other hand, has the merit of not being as roughshod. No one's going to look at a completely and totally washed out, overexposed photo beyond saving in any kind of editing software and say, oh, that's good. There's really a lot of more objectivity to photography. There's more objective characteristics you can use to critique it and assess whether or not it's good or not, that it makes it a much more skillful thing by default than other types of art. And, this helps position photography in a unique place, if you ask me, because these characteristics make it more accessible for people like me who appreciate some sort of, finite controls in the form of knobs and dials and shit, because we aren't so good at bringing things into the world wholesale out of ideas that existed nowhere except in our heads. But so photography is good for people who can't bring a painting out into the world through their hands, just drawing it from the image they have in their mind. But we still, as photographers, have some kind of artistic sensibility about what looks good and what doesn't. We know what's desirable. We just need a little bit more structure in order to start getting at it. So my whole point here is photography is not a lesser art. It is an artful skill, which, again, does not mean it is highest in the hierarchy of skill. Then there are things that are far more technical but less artful in terms of all the skills you could potentially acquire in the world. And my whole point here is that there's no moral value to artfulness versus technicality versus skillfulness, etc. All these things can exist together. There is no hierarchy. It's just different allocations of these particular characteristics. If anything, the art/skill thing is entirely a false dichotomy or a false distinction, and all pursuits in the world are skills with varying degrees of qualities. It's almost like one of those Pentagon charts, those stat charts you get in video games sometimes, where it's like a 5-pointed chart, and they draw the pentagon on the outside to show you the maximum, and then they draw a color on the inside to show how much of the stats are distributed into each of these things for either your character or this weapon you're trying to equip or whatever. Like, you can have a chart that would display weight, damage, and other shit that the game would probably define. But I hope you guys know what I'm talking about. I can't think of a game that uses it off the top of my head right now in the moment, but I'll try to find an example as well, because that's exactly what I think it is. Like, there's no hierarchy of art and skill and technicality and shit. These are all different characteristics of skills in general, and you can have different weights of each artfulness, technicality, etc., for each skill that you could have in the world. So also, before we end the video, let me know in the comments section if you would be interested in basic photography tutorials and explanations, sort of like Java with Jesus once was, where, you know, instead of the whiteboard, I'd be going over stuff. You know, I don't know how I would exactly record it because my phone camera is terrible. Fucking, let me do an aside that I wanted to do for a while now. This is the Moto X4. It is the lower priced phone on Project Fi. It replaced the Nexus 5X, which is the lower priced phone rather on Project Fi, which is Google's phone service, has pretty great rates, and that's the only reason I stay there, because the Nexus 5X had a really fucking great camera, but it was a boot loop machine. Like, I honestly don't know how I got through my European trip without my Nexus 5X boot looping on me, because I went through 5 of them through my time in Project Fi. And then they finally, through much hassle, refunded me and let me purchase. And every time I had to get them replaced, they had to put a fucking $300 hold on my account, because it's my fault. I should bear the responsibility, of course, for shipping a line of phones that is inherently defective. Of course, that's because that's how the world works. But yeah, finally, they refunded me my Nexus 5X purchase and made me purchase this new Moto X4, which is their new device at the same price point. It has 2 cameras on the back, so I can do panoramics and, like, I guess maybe 3D interaction shit, but it's so bad as far as the camera goes. It's so fucking bad. The selfie camera on the front has a higher megapixel count than either of these things on the back, and like, unless you are in totally bright light, and even then it's sort of a fucking shot in the dark, really, metaphorically speaking, unless you're in totally bright light, like, this camera is absolute garbage. Don't go on Project Fi unless you're a rich motherfucker who is going to buy a Google Pixel. I think they're on Pixel 3 now. But yeah, don't go on fucking Project Fi, because even though their rates are pretty good, not as good as they were when I started, I feel like, but maybe I'm just using more data. But yeah, Project Fi hardware fucking sucks at the lower financial end. But that was a total fucking aside. But yeah, let me know in the comments of this video, the Patreon post, or what have you, if you'd be interested in sort of basic photography tutorials and explanations, kind of in the vein of that sort of remedial Java with Jesus style stuff that I once did. Again, and that's how I got on the phone stuff. I don't know how I would record it, because I would, you know, ideally want to show you stuff on the camera physically itself. It would be kind of shitty if I didn't. You want to you know, show the back of the camera, but how am I going to do that if I don't have a second camera, and, you know, this phone can't be relied on, which is how I got on the phone stuff. But yeah, let me know if that would be interested, and I will see about trying to figure out how to get past the problem of needing to record the camera and also needing the camera to record. I'll try to get past that if there's enough interest. Although, that said, you may not be interested, because it is, I'm entirely self-taught, and I produce pretty good photos based on, you know, just a rudimentary knowledge of all the camera settings and the fucking rule of thirds. It's really easy to teach yourself once you know, get a camera and Google a few basics and then just go out there and practice. But yeah, let me know if you'd be interested in that. But that is my thoughts, or those are my thoughts rather, on whether or not photography is art, and my sort of history with the discipline. For the end of this video, I'm going to try to illustrate some of the things, maybe as like a preview in effect of this hypothetical potential photography rudimentary course series. I'll show you a couple of things that I'm talking about I've been talking about in the video, in some pictures that I took both in Europe last year for the more architectural, landscapey side of things, and then I'll throw in a couple concert photos as well. So anyway, I will see you next time. I've been obviously Jesus. Before we get into the music recommendations, or before we get into the examples, your music recommendation for the week is an album from 2017 by a band called RVG. They're from Australia. I only heard of them because I was at a Courtney Barnett show recently. Unfortunately, I'm not taking photos, although I probably could have put in for that and gotten it. I didn't even try, but Yeah, I probably could have gotten in there. But anyway, my point is, I heard them over the PA at a Courtney Barnett concert. The first song, which is what I heard, is called "The Quality of Mercy." That's also the type of that's also the title, excuse me, of the album. It's a sort of anti-death penalty song. Got a really good indie rock vibe to it. Not really punk, but definitely really, really solid on the very, very solid high end of indie rock. Really great sound. Again, the band is RVG. That stands for something I don't know off the top of my head. And the album is A Quality of Mercy. And you can preview it and listen to all the tracks streaming on Bandcamp, which is what I will link to in the body of the Patreon post as usual. But anyway, I'm obviously Jesus. Let's get into those examples, and I will see you guys, hopefully without a towel on my head, next week. Oh god, I look horrible. Fuck me. Or don't. Alright, so here we are looking at some pictures here in OBS or what have you. I don't really know what the purpose of this is. I guess it's like half a continuation or a follow-up on shit I mentioned in the video, and half like a preview of the potential series that I could do on photography and stuff that would be on the Patreon. But yeah, anyway, let's cycle through some pictures from Europe, and then I'll show you some from concerts. But yeah, these are JPEGs as well. I wasn't shooting raw in Europe because, you know, better lighting, you have more control, and really it's not for anybody else. But here's an example of, and this is something I didn't actually talk about in the video, but it's called bokeh. Bokeh. It refers to the blur effect that you see on stuff like the froth on this soy cappuccino or whatever. So this in the front, which is much blurrier than this in the center. I mean, any JPEG is going to look kind of shitty when you zoom in this deep. It's not going to look that in focus, but you can see when I zoom out then that you know, there's a massive difference between what's in the center here and what's in the front or the foreground here. And this is an example of bad bokeh or bokeh. Fuck, it's some Japanese derived word that I can't pronounce correctly, but I don't think anyone really can. But this is an example of bad shit, and it's part of a bad habit that concert photographers have, because in low light situations, you're pretty much going to be shooting at I forget if it's lowest or highest, at the most open aperture that you can get. So the lower the number is, the more open your aperture is, I'm pretty sure. I'm self-taught. I know what the dial does. I don't know exactly what the technical definitions and glossary terms are all about. But, you know, this is at f over 2.8 or f2.8. So this is an example of bad bokeh because this is something that comes from being a concert photographer and always shooting at f2.8, which is the lowest on this particular lens, this 24-70. I should have gotten myself a little bit out of that habit for doing different kinds of photography, because, you know, you can see that it's too blurry. The openness of your aperture adjusts the depth of field. It adjusts, so as you go lower and lower on that f number, as you get, you know, as the integer or the integer and the decimal place get lower, you get a tinier window of shit that's actually in focus. Doesn't obey that 100% of the time, but generally speaking, for close-ups like this and portraits, that is absolutely 100% true for portraits and close-ups like this. So you can see that my aperture was too open, therefore the depth of field was so small that it didn't even encompass the entirety of the top of the coffee. So this cream, or crema, or whatever the fuck it's called technically in coffee terms, is not nearly as in focus as the cinnamon and the stuff on this other side of it. So you can see it doesn't look terrible. You still get a sense of what's there, and you definitely want this background stuff like the fork and the glasses and you know, people's hands and shit. You definitely want that blurry, but, you know, preferably you want the window of the depth of field to extend to the front of this cup and stop generally around the end of the cup. Rather than having what we have here, but I've spent way too long on that. A better example, this is at f over 5. People just call it f5 because saying over every time you want to refer to your fucking aperture is really annoying. But yeah, this is an example of, these are vegan like scallop things. In Paris, like, I honestly don't like gourmet restaurants. I don't know about you guys, but people who like to jerk off over, you know, plating and then charge you a ton of money for not a lot of food. That's kind of shitty to me, if you ask me. But yeah, you can see this black bean thing over here. I think that's what it was, is in focus. And then this is much better because even though this foreground thing isn't quite in focus, it's still better than the cappuccino or whatever it was. And all four of these are very much in focus. So it's just generally better, so you can get a better idea of the texture and stuff on this when you want to zoom in and look at it in detail. And even the bread is it's in focus enough so that you know it's bread. Here is an example of bokeh being used somewhat more correctly. I'm not entirely a big fan of the framing on this. I could probably rotate it around in Lightroom or Photoshop so that the Arc de Triomphe is a little bit more level on the ground, and you know the cars and the sign can rotate. But yeah, short of that, you know, here's an example of, you know, highlighting the street sign. This is at f2.8, I'm pretty sure, as well, and then you sort of blur the background so you can use the camera settings to emphasize focus on one thing and de-emphasize other stuff. And in, you know, darker, dingy, shittier lit places like you know, clubs and music stuff, you know, this can be really used to, you know, spotlight one person in the front and blur everybody else in the back, so you know somebody's there, but they really pop out. The person you're trying to focus really pops out, like this sign pops out instead of the arc. Here's a nice example of me at f13, probably a little too closed aperture, but yeah, as you close the aperture, of course, less light gets in. But here's a nice example of daylight being nice to me and giving me a nice shot of this this Parisian street near the Arc de Triomphe, near Place de la Bastille. Then we move on to a landscape that I actually took from a bus, which is pretty fucking amazing, because really the only kind of distortion you get from the movement of the bus is down here at on the trees. They kind of look blurry, but this is the Three Sisters in Glencoe in the Scottish Highlands, and the mountain is perfectly in focus. Again, if you zoom in on a fucking JPEG, anything looks shitty when you zoom in on it enough. But, you know, at this regular resolution that you can expect people to look at it through, or look at it at, the Three Sisters look pretty fucking good, and this whole valley's over here, and you know, not everything's in focus, but the mountain is. It really pops, and everything else in front and behind the other two mountains have pretty decent definition as well. And this is not even at 13 or 11 or anything crazy like that. This is at f6.3. Then we move on to Ireland. This is an example of something I wish I'd shot raw, because I could have done a little bit to affect the highlighting, because there's lanterns on the bottom of the bridge, I believe, that are making the center here a little bit washed out and garish, but just a tiny little Lightroom adjustment would have made this a real good example of nighttime photography, although I think I am fully open on that. Here is Blarney Castle, just outside of Cork. And you can see, I mean, everybody and their fucking mom, I'm sure, has taken a focused picture of the castle through this hole. I wanted to focus on the hole. I thought it would come out. And this is one of the things, this is where it starts to break down. This is where my knowledge starts to get a little bit weird, because I'm at f7.1 here, which is more closed than I was in this picture of the Three Sisters. So this is 6.3. This is 7.1. And in 6.3, this shit's really nice and decently sharp back here, but you know, here maybe it has to do with where I focus the camera. I'm not entirely sure, so this is why I'm hesitant to make a fucking full instructional video, because I'm not entirely sure why, because it seems to me that the castle should be way more in focus at 7.1, but maybe it's just some kind of weird distance relative to the lens. I don't know. I forget which lens I had on this, but anyway, here is, I forget, I think this is 6.3 or 5.6. This is where you start. And if you want to take landscapes, you start going up to like 5.6, 6.3, 7, and probably stop at 11 or 13 at the most. But yeah, this is a view from the top of the Eiffel Tower. So you can see, you get some, again, it looks shitty if you zoom all the way in, but you get the shapes of all the individual windows on these buildings around here and all that stuff as well. Here is an example of what I was talking about with like street photography. It really doesn't mean anything. It's not like moving or powerful image, but you know, this is on the back of a fucking street sign in Paris. So, or is this England? But anyway, you know, it's on the back of a street sign. Who would really think to look there? This is texture. This is sort of like amateurish macro photography. This is what macro photography is about, like getting really small details, getting really nice textures. You can make this a wallpaper. This is at 2.8 though, so you definitely see the bokeh on the bottom here. These are blurrier than this stuff in the center here, and it starts to get a little bit blurry again on the outside as well. But yeah, this is sort of like the vein of macro photography. You can kind of do it with a lens like this, but you definitely want a specific macro lens if you're gonna like shoot bees on flowers and get really nice detail. Here's another example of texture on the beaches of Dover in England. Same thing, except I had the aperture correct so that everything is pretty sharp. You can see that, again, this is pretty blurry. This is at 2.8, and this is, I think, at 6.3 or something. Probably didn't even need to go that high for something that's close up, but everything is in focus pretty much on the edges as well. This is just a funny thing I threw in. Apparently there's a place called Tooting in England. Here is, you know, a touristy photo of the cathedral at Notre Dame, but it's weirdly framed, I think, so it's like, I don't know, it gets the nice detail on all these dudes and all the nice art and stuff without getting like the typical touristy photo of the whole cathedral. So I'm just patting myself in the back there. This is another thing that throws me though. This is a shot from inside a tram or light rail on the Seine, going over the Seine in Paris. There's this nice narrow boat there, but this is at 2.8, and yet you still get all the individual window definitions over here. But this rail in front of me is blurry. But yeah, this is sort of like me using the window of the tram to make sort of this like weird glossed over effect that might not come through that well in the video, but that's what I'm doing here. But I don't know how all these, I guess maybe the bokeh falls off after a while, maybe, and that's why you get individual definition on all these buildings way the fuck back there. But I don't know about that. And then the last one for Europe, I think, is it the last one? Yes, the last one is this photo of Bar Italia. There's a Pulp song off of a different class called Bar Italia. I actually couldn't remember at the time where I knew the name from, but it's a 24-hour coffee shop in London's Soho neighborhood, like a couple minutes walk from Piccadilly Circus. Really, really nice. I really love being there. I felt so like, I felt like a New Yorker almost, like a fucking the London or the English equivalent of a New Yorker, just having my Oyster card, taking the tube, going to Piccadilly Circus, going to fucking Bar Italia. There's a picture of like all the celebrities. There's pictures of all the celebrities on the wall. You can kind of see like right there, not in focus again, but or not, you know, detail at that fucking level. But Emily Ratajkowski, the big tits girl from Gone Girl, is in there in the fucking Robin Thicke video. She's in there having a coffee. Not in there personally, but in a picture in there having a coffee. But yeah, it's a fucking 24-hour coffee shop. If you go to London, go there. It's fucking pretty lit, as the kids say. But yeah, let's move on to some fucking band photos. Okay, I didn't want to start here, but I guess this is just how the alphabetical order is going to go. I rename my photos when I put them on my PC. I put an X in front of the file names of the ones that I want to keep, and or the ones that I want to really, you know, make part of a photo set when I post them on the site or my Instagram or whatever. This is one that I didn't want to start with because it's Flash. Generally speaking, for all big venues and stuff, like Flash is almost strictly verboten everywhere. Again, the typical rule is first 3 songs, no flash. That's pretty standard. You'll hear that all the time. But yeah, this is me shooting the crowd at an Idols show. Here's Lee from Idols in the crowd there. And I only put on the flash for this because the stage lighting was sufficient. But yeah, if you want to shoot the crowd, it's nice to have a flash handy so you can get some crowd shots, because there's generally no lighting on the crowd, especially in a smaller club like the Brighton Music Hall here. So I put on flash for this one. And I mean, I didn't go against the rules, by the way. They didn't have a fucking flash policy. They didn't. I shot the whole show when I went there, so I wasn't like doing it behind their backs or anything. I'm not sure they liked it, but again, if they don't tell you, then, you know, go ahead. Try to be, you know, respectful, but go ahead is the sort of general rule I would give. But yeah, this is flash. If you overexpose the flash, Lightroom will generally help you fix it unless you really miss the mark. Flashes are sort of weird to use, but they're simple enough once you get a general hang of them and how much you have to adjust your settings from normal stuff. That's a nice crowd shot using flash. I just wanted to talk about that. Here's a photo of Shame, the another English punk band. This one is actually, it's not a long exposure. I only expose this for like a regular amount of time. When you're doing concert photography, you don't want to go under like 1/80th of a second for your shutter speed, because then everything gets blurry all the time and it's really shit. I generally try to do like 125 and above, or 125 and larger integer denominators, so faster shutter speed. But this is sort of like a mini example of what the type of long exposure would do. You got this cool hand down here, which looks kind of nice. Integrating the crowds minimally without being too gratuitous is a nice skill you can learn. This is on, I think, my wider lens. It might be on the 24 to 70, but I think it's on my 16 to 35. Wider lenses let you do some nice crowd integration as well. You can see his face is very blurry because the shutter was open long enough for him to move his head in that range. So that's the idea of a long exposure. If I really opened the shutter for a long ass time, everybody would be blurry, and sometimes it comes out looking good, most of the time it looks shit. But you can sort of train yourself to do long exposures. Although if you're doing first 3 songs no flash, you're not going to want to be doing long exposures. That shit is too fucking time consuming to get it right. Here is the Decemberist, another good example of crowd integration here. Kind of shitty framing, really. Like, I mean, you kind of have an eye for it. I guess the drum set does end on the left, and there's the pedal board on the left. It's not like people are half in. I don't like that this guy is behind Colin here, but you get a nice crowd shot. Of course, this woman's on her phone, but having the band interacting with the crowd, and this is just one of those things you got to learn. Band's interacting with crowd, you take a picture of the crowd, you get some nice rays of light behind him as well, so that's a pretty decent photo. Here's one of my actually all-time favorites. I think this is on my 6D before I upgraded, actually. It's Claire Evans of Yacht. Like right in your face, really. You can see the bokeh here. The entire background is blurry while all of the foreground is pretty much in focus. Like only her left shoulder is starting to get out of focus there. But yeah, she's on her telephone here. Yeah, that was a fucking great gig. But yeah, this is a nice example. This is how bokeh should look. Bokeh, whatever the fuck, Boca Raton should look. And that's just why I would put it in there. Here's Modest Mouse. I got a couple Modest Mouse photos in this set, actually. Here's a crowd shot, arguably a little gratuitous. One of the things you can do is that, like, here's the photo pit. I'm sure if you've been to concerts, you know what the photo pit is. Guys go in there for the first 3 songs, and then, no, I don't want to crop this. You go in there for the first 3 songs, and then you come back out. There's Isaac, and there's the lighting. These fucking people, the Worcester Palladium is kind of weird. They have these raised little box seats up here that I was trying to work around. But yeah, sometimes if the venue's chill, they allow you to move around the venue and take like long, wider angles from different points in the venue. And that's what I was doing here. This is towards like the end of the show or end of the main set, and I got everybody up here. Dude's on his phone again. Here's Okkerville River, another good example of bokeh being good. You got Will Chef from Okkerville River here, and the tambourine in focus, everything else nice and blurry. Nice little halo of light. You can tone that down individually in Lightroom as well. One of the nice things, one of the reasons I now say never avoid it. But yeah, here's another one, wide angle lens. Shame again, fucking Charlie throwing his mic into the crowd. Looks like I would have preferred to get the mic fully in the shot, maybe him a little bit off to the right. But it's still a pretty good thing. If I draw the crop thing on here, you'll see rule of thirds. Generally, you want things to either be segmented into these thirds or action to occur at the intersection of these thirds. So like if I had looked a little bit to my left right here, like his face would be right on this cross and the mic would be right on this cross down here. So that would have been preferable, but still you got a nice 1, 2, 3 thing going on here. Nice little crowd integration here. You can actually see another photographer's camera in the bottom right there, but I could Photoshop that out, but I don't really give a shit. But yeah, here is him. And this is one of the reasons why you got to be attentive. This is Charlie Steen from Shame in the fucking crowd. But because I didn't frame it right, and also because he's crouching, you really can't see just how high he is in relation to the stage and the rest of the venue. I know a guy who got a really, really great shot of this moment when he actually stands up from the back of the venue. So I'm kind of envious. You can also see it's quite washed out. One of the reasons you have to pay attention to your fucking settings is because, you know, when he comes out in the crowd like this, or when somebody comes out in the crowd is darker. It's not illuminated by all the stage lights. So you should fucking know that even if you're going to get noise is this shit. Noise is this little sort of a microscopic level pixelation. Even if you're going to get more of that, you turn up your fucking ISO or you throw on your flash instead, but generally they don't allow that again. But yeah, you turn up your ISO, you deal with the noise in Lightroom, and you fucking try to get a shot like this. Or you could try to get a jump shot, which in a second. Here's a nice portrait of Isaac from Modest Mouse from the photo pit. I don't really like that everything down here is white. Fucking sort of, you know, struggling with this actually now that I look at it from here. But yeah, everything on the everything from like here to the right, pretty good. Nice under focus. Here's another similar vertical portrait of Sean from AJJ just recently. He's doing this nice little emotive thing with his guitar, cradling it. Nice moment. I didn't even really have to get rid of the green lights or anything, because it gives him sort of a weird tone that I like, that matches, I guess, the mood of the photo. Here's a jump shot. It took me fucking forever to get jump shots, but yeah, this is Spiritual Cramp. I think they were a music recommendation a couple months back. But yeah, this is Spiritual Cramp. They're tambourine player, designated tambourine player, jumping in the air. You got to have your I think really shitty lighting in this fucking pub where I took this picture, but you know, everybody's decent. That's the thing about the wide lens. Don't be too sad if you're using a wide lens and like people on the edge, their faces look deformed or they're not quite in focus like the guitarist over here. That happens with wide lenses. What matters is that, you know, what's in the center is the center of the action and they're in focus. He's a little blurry because my shutter speed wasn't fast enough, but really this is a good looking picture. Again, wide lenses have this sort of weird fisheye warping on the sides. Don't worry about that. Just worry about getting the center. And even if I wanted to, I could fucking just go into Lightroom and do a vertical crop on that and just take these two guys. But decent picture. But yeah, anyway, you know, that just rewards you with attentiveness. You know, all these things are examples of like me not being as attentive as I should be, and then me being, you know, in these two attentive as I should be. But anyway, I'm obviously just thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope maybe it gave you some insight into something. I don't know. If not, then there'll be another video next week, which in lieu of any suggestions, or if there are no suggestions by next week, I'm going to make a video entitled 3 Unpopular Opinions, and you'll see what those are when I get around to making that. And we will be doing a Thanksgiving Cooking with Christ to end the year as well, or to do that holiday season as well. So anyway, I'm obviously Jesus. Remember to check out RVG, A Quality of Mercy on Bandcamp. Hit that link in the Patreon post. I don't get any kickback for this. I just fucking really like their music. See you next time.